Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to AMAC 360. We're going to give it about a minute as the room starts to fill up. I know we had actually a lot of people who registered for this AMAC 360 roundtable, and it was a lot. So we'll just give folks a couple of minutes before we get started. A couple of minutes seems a long time. I think we're probably just several seconds to get going.
When you have to wait for it, yes.
Yes.
That's true. That's true. Well, you know what? Let's just crack on. I just want to be very cognizant of everyone's time. First and foremost, to everyone that's attending, my name is Ramon Lowe. I am the Director of Membership and Industry Engagement for the Airport Minority Advisory Council. And this is AMAC 360. And if you are not aware of what AMAC 360 is, and I see Steve Bass is in the chat. Welcome, Steve. This is our monthly virtual roundtable where we gather a series of subject matter experts to tackle a certain topic or form of discussion. And so for this iteration of it, we're going to talk about just really getting brands or concepts into the airport and how you can expand it. And of course, our panelists, seasoned veterans in this space, offer different perspectives and maybe even similar perspectives. But before we get to that, just a few housekeeping notes. So if you haven't already, please make sure you renew your membership. We've been sending out notices since actually beginning of December 2024. Please make sure you renew your membership. If you're a member of a chapter, please let us know so we can send you a separate invoice to renew that as well. And you're going to want to renew that membership because we have two major events that we definitely will be announcing. Well, one is officially announced. I'm sorry, it's been a long day. The Economic Opportunity and Policy Forum, which is going to take place March 26th to the 28th in Washington, D.C. It's live. Registration is open. You can go to the site right now at amacforum.com. You can see the number of sponsorships. We will be also populating the agenda and making, so just keep an eye out for that. And also, as everyone knows, it's our tentpole event, our annual conference, the Airport Business Diversity Conference, which will take place June 28th to July 2nd in New Orleans. And we know this is the big 4-0. Brooke probably hasn't crossed 4-0 yet, but the big 4-0, 4 decades of AMAC, of the AMAC conference, coming in late June into July. It will be in New Orleans. So thank you to Kevin Dolio and the team there at the airport for being wonderful partners. So I say those two events because it dovetails into renewing your membership, because in order to get the best discount on a registration, you want to renew your membership. So again, if please make sure you go to amacforum.com to learn more about the econ forum coming up. And as far as the annual conference, we will be announcing that soon. And when we do, then you can go on and check out everything that we have on there. And if you have any questions about membership renewal, please feel free to reach out to me. And it's rlo@amac-org.com. So anyway, with that out the way, I want to turn to today's AMAC 360 panel. And by the way, this is going to be recorded and will be published on our YouTube channel probably several days after the recording. So I want to introduce our panel today. Depending on where you are right now, and they had their names up, Brooke Bowman is the Director of Brand Partnerships and Concept Development for Arias USA. Thank you, Brooke. Milan Patel is the President of OHM Concessions, and Silvia Peralta is the founder of SMP Concessions. Folks, guys, thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
Perfect. So like I mentioned at the top of the program, just like all of you, I've been approached many times over my career here with regards to, I want to get into this airport space. I have this great concept that I think is going to be killer in airports. And in some ways, I don't know about you guys, I usually give them the bad and the ugly of our business before I even give them the good, because that's all they see. So what I want to kind of tackle today is, with each of your various perspectives, just give us your thoughts on some of these questions. And we did reach out to our members for some questions. I will make sure to kind of share those at the end as well. So the very, very first one, just to kind of ease everyone into the discussion, what is the biggest misconception that any operator brand has about the airport? I think that should be a layup for you guys, honestly. And we're going to start with Brooke.
Sure. I think kind of the opposite of what you said, Ramon. I think one of the biggest misconceptions when I'm talking to brands or get a hold of brands is they don't know how to get into the airport, or they didn't think it was possible, right? Like, oh, I thought I had to be a national brand or a large regional chain to get in. And that's just not the case, right? We definitely want to look for some longevity, right? Because these contracts are 10 and sometimes with extensions 15 years. So you want to make sure your brand is relevant for that time. But, really, I think the biggest misconception is, I can't get in because I'm not, big enough. And that's just not true.
All right.
Sylvia? Milan?
Sylvia?
Oh yeah, and I think another misconception is, and I like maybe a negative on this one, is that it's easy to make money. I think sometimes they see all these employments, right? They see 25 million people. Of course, it's going to be a home run. Like, my brand is, it's not even that the brand is great or isn't great. It's just that there's so much competition and the capture rate is so much lower than what people really anticipate. I think it really shocks them when they think sales are going to be $10 million, 5 million, and you're like maybe 1.8 million. Right. And that's still a great number, but I think there's this just kind of stars in the eyes where you're like, of course, I'm going to make so much money and it's going to be so easy.
Yeah.
So Milan, I want to piggyback a second for what Sylvia just said, and I hear this too. I see there supposedly 3 million people travel through this concourse a year. If I just capture 0.5%, I can get this and this and this, and that math doesn't usually math. So, I mean, from an operator standpoint, is that similar to what you're thinking as far as the misconception?
100%. I mean, Silvia and Brooke are right on point in terms of misconception, but also the investments, right? I mean, the brands on the street are used to getting TIs and certain things that the airports don't give you. You're on your own to build out the stores, and the costs are sometimes 3 times what the RFP says. So they don't know that either,
Mhm.
And
And
is
that's
this
a
just a
really good
matter
point.
of,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Sylvia.
I was also going to say another thing that we're facing, and I think it's something a lot of people are interested in as well, is labor.
Yeah.
Labor's gotten in many markets very, very high, and I think it's very different than what I call the real world, right? The airport and it's just the union and living wage. And I know Milan, you and I had talked about it before, but many years ago when we were young, we never thought $25 an hour would ever be in our lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you add benefits on top. So
Good point. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think just to piggyback up what you said, Sylvia, like labor, not just the cost of it, but the availability of it too. Because I think, if I'm going to go work at a Starbucks or a McDonald's or whatever it is, why would I want to go out, drive however far from the airport so early in the morning, take a shuttle to get into the terminal, then God forbid there's a delay, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's one of the other things. I think people kind of see, oh my gosh, $25 an hour. That's great from an employee standpoint, but it's a little different on that end. But
well, also they have to go through security and get badged. So it's not like you can just pull up to the front and walk in, right? There's a process, and
as opposed to the Starbucks that's right around your corner, or maybe 5 minutes from where you live, that you can kind of just do the thing. So I know I gave the panelists, as I always do, just general topics of what we want to cover, but I do caveat that by saying I'll ask a follow-up, but also one that's not on here. So I'm going to pull that card now and play off of something that Brooke mentioned in terms of, you mentioned longevity of a brand. How can you tell that? I mean, longevity can mean anything. Like you could, McDonald's has longevity, and
Right.
obviously it probably will continue, but how can you say I identify brand X or concept X, and I can forecast, this has legs. I'm sure there's not one formula.
Yeah, I mean, there's many factors, right? We always have to stay ahead of trends, and in those trends, do we think they have longevity? Are they going to stay around for 10 years? Or, you could be working on an RFP now, but that store's not going to open for 2 years. Look at San Diego, that terminal is under construction, right? So, we do look at, how long has it been open and different factors of that, or maybe there's multiple locations. Again, it doesn't mean that that's, a make or break for whether you get in, but those are factors we have to consider. Also, we are starting to see in RFPs that it states if this location or brand closes on the street, you as a concessionaire needs to reconcept it within a year. Well, we have to take that into consideration because like Milan said earlier, that's capital coming from us, not the brand.
Yeah. To add to that?
I mean, aligning the brand's owners, what are their plans for the longevity for their brand, right? So we want to make sure that it ties in. Is it just, grow and sell or move on or whatever the brand might be doing,
Yeah. We don't want them to be like, oh, we're going to get in the airport and then close on the street. We're good to go, right? It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is with that, I'll piggyback a little bit. It happens not just to local and smaller brands, but national brands. You know, since COVID, we've seen so many national brands that are struggling, TGI Fridays, many others that were mainstays.
Yeah.
So I think it's not even just like the local brands, it's also national brands that are really struggling in the new world, right, since COVID. So it's kind of it's a delicate dance, right? Because you want new, fresh, and sexy,
Yeah,
but
And you
I
want
can't
tried
keep
and true.
rebuilding new spec. I can't be
exactly.
rebuilding my food court every 3 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Fridays. That might be one example of the actual unit in an airport outliving possibly the brand itself. I mean, we saw that with Brookstone in some ways, right? Kind of. So I'm glad we went on labor. I'm going to go to one of the member submitted questions because it is related. And it's, so what are your thoughts on machines or automated experiences that don't necessarily rely much on labor? So I'm going to go to Milan with that first.
I think it's airport by airport. I mean, some airports prefer automation machines. Some airports still want the personal touch. So it's hit and miss. I mean, I'm all for automation, but you know, sometimes the brands are opposed to it. Certain brands, you know, they may not want the self-ordering kiosks, but it helps you. But they may think that you're trading the labor. You're gonna not have labor. Instead, you're gonna rely on the technology. You know.
And I think it kind of, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Sylvia.
Oh, thanks, Brooke. I also think it depends on your demographic. I
Absolutely.
think, you know, for many, I guess more older airports, I would say that when they're, you know, their actual demographic is older than the general population, you gotta kind of take that into consideration. If you have a lot of internationals, like, you know, in JFK or San Francisco, you have to be kind of cognizant that they may not be at that level of, not sophistication, it's not the word I'm looking for, but tech savvy. And it's overwhelming. So many people are stressed when they travel, and you're adding additional stress because they don't know how to order a sandwich.
And the language barrier, right? They may not be fluent in English, so it's
Good point.
depends if
Yeah.
the kiosk is in multi-language or not.
Yeah. You know, one thing I'll add to that, Ramon, is also integrity of the brand, right? So we need to ensure that, you know, we're executing the brand to the brand standard, right? And technology can be a balance. I think it's nice to have it. So for instance, I actually saw a demo last month on a walk. And the way they were kind of selling it, I was thinking just Asian, but when I went and saw this demo, they actually could cook anything in this wok. And it wasn't that they were taking a cook off the line, right? It wasn't reducing that factor, but it was, they had two going. So they had one person working these two stations. So it was being more efficient. And also, you know, with that, it also took the skill out of using a wok. You know, a wok cook is this highly skilled, expensive piece of labor, right? So having this robotic wok, right, that could cook efficiently, and it was programmed, and you just needed someone to run the machine. You know, again, just a balance of where can we add technology where it makes sense, or the self-ordering kiosk.
Especially back at the house, like you mentioned, Brooke. I think the consistency and quality of food just increases when you have automation back there. You know.
Yeah.
And it also controls your margin, because
Oh,
every chef that we've all worked with, some like it spicier, some like this, and then you're like, but the recipe said half a cup. Oh, I want a whole cup. You're like, oh no, half a cup.
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I totally get it. I think there's just, I think the whole automation thing really started way before COVID. I think COVID kind of just gave it the reason for to kind of further it along. I mean, we had, what is it, the Cafe X's, Yokai, actually both from San Francisco International, and piloted those. But it seems like those had more traction at an international level, you know, abroad versus maybe here. And I guess that's why we still want that local feel. I don't think that if I rolled up to a sit-down restaurant that it's gonna be a robot, maybe. So maybe it will be. I don't know, but maybe back of house is where it probably, you know, makes the most sense. I'm going to pivot because I did get a couple of retail questions. It's a little different here. So is retail outside of the travel essential stores that we see now, is it still possible? Is there still value in having specialty in programs? And Sylvia, you're nodding your head a lot, so I'm going to go to you first.
And I'll say it has to be, like, I think, like any concept, whether it's food or retail, the right airport. I think we have to be smart with specialty retail. Since COVID, I mean, a lot of the national brands have really struggled because you can go into the store. We do it all at the mall in traditional settings, look at it and then order it on Amazon or even less expensive on their website. But there is that impulse buy that we still have in airports. So I think it has to be smartly placed. It has to have a sense of place. It has to be something unique, something that you walk by and say, oh, that'd be really cute. I want to bring it to my kid or to my neighbor, or the person watching my dog. So I think while national has a place, and we're seeing some success stories with like Lego and some other brands, you know, it is definitely a very hard machine these days, but not impossible. It just has to be placed. Another thing that we've all noticed, and it has to be cohesive. I think the days of having just random specialty stores throughout the airport does not work. They have to be kind of in a shopping environment. And, you know, it has to make sense for what we do for a living. And I think that's why you still see very successful electronic stores, snack stores like candy does very well, but it has to be really well thought out, and it can't just be everywhere within the airport.
Yeah,
That's true.
just like Chef Maria said in the chat, the Amazon effect. So true.
Mm-hmm. And we see it every day when people come into a store, they like it, but then they go onto their cell phone and you know they're buying it online and it's going to get shipped to their house when they get there tomorrow.
And maybe even cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
True,
It's
true.
gonna be
Milan?
cheaper because of the pricing structure and all that, right? So the airports, it's gonna be street plus whatever or street. It's also you know, the person that's buying it is gonna weigh out the options, and it's gonna get delivered to their doorsteps. You know, Amazon
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
killed everybody.
No, it definitely. I'm going to go back to I overlooked another labor question, and this might be a little harder. And this is one of the questions that one of our members had submitted. So, should labor be a consideration for the kind of concepts when trying to partner with the food operator? You know, as a brand, should I just adjust for the airport with new methods if we don't use those same methods anywhere else? And I think that's more someone. I think maybe a owner of a concept who's saying, Milan, I'd like to, you know, you can consider my sandwich concept. I don't know, whatever it is. But I'm a high skilled labor type of concept. Does that seem appealing to you?
So as long as the brand partner is willing to assess it together, right? See what's causing the labor. Is it the prep time? Is it certain things that they're doing from scratch that could be bought that is similar in taste or etc. that we could substitute for the airport setting? And the willingness of the brand to adapt to that, right? Sometimes they may say, no, it's strictly the way we do it, you know? And in those situations, it will be a tough decision for us because, you know, we got high rents, high food cost. Now you're tacking on high labor, you know, dollar's a dollar, as Mr. Benton always says.
Yeah, exactly, Milan. It just goes back to, Ramon, the integrity of the brand, right? If we can execute the same taste and quality by utilizing a different process or method, then sure. But if not, like Milan said, we've got to, you know, run that performa and see, you know, at the end of the day, are we going to make money?
Yep. Yep.
Oh, did you freeze, Ramon?
Oh, I think he froze.
Yeah. I mean, he said he would embarrass himself. I think he just did it.
No, sorry. Did I freeze again?
Yeah,
I'm trying to.
Yeah, we were like waiting to see.
No. And this is one of the drawbacks, right, with regards to doing this stuff virtually. But you know, we're gonna work through it. So as long as like I'm not like frozen in a really, well, it's hard not to be frozen with this face. But let me get to another user member question. You know, suggestions on standing out in a crowd. And the example they gave is such as chicken. You know, so what are some of your thoughts on how to differentiate? Now that's a very broad category. You can say chicken, it could be chicken sandwiches, whatever. But if you're very much your comp at a national level is a national chain, you know, how do you and maybe the RFP doesn't necessarily call for something local or national, whatever. It's pretty agnostic. You know, how do I or this person who's asking the question kind of differentiate themselves from that standpoint? And we'll go to Brooke on that.
Yeah, I mean, QSR check-in, I would say, is one of the most competitive categories out there right now. There is a lot of chicken concepts out there, you know, so it's important we're looking at quality and then, sustainability. Are they using organic cage-free chicken? What's the story? Are they adding maybe an international flair, right? A Korean barbecue. Hot honey was really hot there for a while. No pun intended, but I did. So just again, when it comes back to those trends, staying ahead of trends, and does this trend have longevity?
And
So-
I think for maybe smaller brands, and maybe you agree, Brooke and Milan, is if you can regionalize it. Can
Yep.
you have something on the menu that the nationals cannot flex into, right? Because it's just not in their business model to do so, like in Nashville hot chicken, right? Maybe that's something that's so unique, that is really special, that gets you that edge against maybe some of the nationals who just cannot pivot to that menu item because it's just
Yep.
not in the full machine.
And the opposite, Sylvia, will Nashville hot chicken work in other regions, right? People may like, no, that does not work here, so it goes both ways.
Exactly. Mhm.
Yeah.
No.
As Steve mentioned on the chat,
Yeah,
I mean, flexibility is important, right? If the brand, if it's a local brand or a regional brand, they have to have an open mind in order to take feedback from us as an operator to say, hey, it's working, it's not working, and the flexibility is needed,
Let's go to, I mean, because I think most folks will just assume that it's the local small brand that can only localize and regionalize the menu. Have you guys seen where maybe it could be a larger and more national chain that will say, I'm introducing, let's say, and I totally had this conversation with a national sandwich chain. If you came into Miami, it's not on your menu, but could you do a Cuban sandwich?
Right.
Or something like that to localize it? I mean, have you guys seen it go in that direction versus from small to, from the small guys? Brooke?
both, right? I've seen it both ways where brands, I don't want to say shove, right? But they highly encourage to do LTOs. And sometimes we are in a position to do it or not, depending on size, space, and different things. And then it could go other ways where we're saying, hey, we would like to see something unique here. So yeah.
But I'll piggyback on something that Brooke has been saying, but we have to be careful because sometimes brands just want to be in a space that they will do whatever it takes and then they lose their integrity.
Yeah.
So it's it's a dance where you still need to be true to who you are as the brand and the offer, and maybe add one or two limited time promotions, but it can't be all of a sudden you're a sandwich selling hamburgers.
Yeah. And Sylvia, I'm actually going to kind of piggyback even off that again. Also, what we see is, when we're looking at the RFPs, Ramon, and the flexibility, right? It can go two ways, like Sylvia's saying, where, the RFP is stating, well, you need to have breakfast. And a brand may say, I'm not going to do breakfast. We don't do breakfast. It's like, okay, I appreciate that, but I'm not going to be able to put you in this RFP because I'm going to get disqualified for not having a breakfast menu, right? So that can be a factor as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most common. I mean, I've seen that a lot, right? Some brands don't want to add breakfast, or, some brands are willing to allow us to put the breakfast program for them,
Yeah.
which is great. Then we take it out of their hands,
Yeah.
It's funny because this is probably 10 years ago in an airport that I will not name, but you guys will probably figure it out eventually, with a fast casual Asian brand that you probably will figure out, that I will not name, where basically they did not have a breakfast item. But they're like, okay, well, if we just have eggs and we have rice, let's just throw those together and that would be breakfast. Now, I'm from the Philippines. That's normal for me. So it's to be expected. But I think others are like, well, that's kind of weak. You just kind of threw those items together. But it makes sense if you want to be competitive and relevant in some ways to the RFP, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm going to shift back to some of the questions that that I had come up with. That wasn't the Freudian slip. So what are some of the just basic things? I think we have, and this is going to be recorded and will be pushed out to all of our members, because I see a lot of folks that are in the chat, not exactly newbies for the most part, but what are some of the basic adjustments that you guys have made to brands to make sure it does translate to the airport? I think you, Milan, you mentioned it. Steve, I think Steve Bass and I, who's in the chat, we've talked about this before. If you're known for your 9-ounce filet, could you make it a 6? It's like how in love are you with your brand that you're not willing, or how willing are you to kind of make those adjustments? So I'll start with you, Milan.
I think it's important because sometimes, we have to have that balance of what we could charge, and we don't want to price ourselves out of the market by having that 9-ounce filet on the menu and charging us a higher price comp. It's just a case by case, and I think the brands have to have the flexibility and adaptability to be able to allow us to change the variances, but not compromise the quality, right?
Well, let me, before I go to you guys, it's not so much to save on cost. I think, and Steve's old, so hopefully he remembers this, but like this is going back. This is when like it's more so just cooking time, just processing time. You don't have the time, like if you're known for your 12-ounce burger, well, I need to, it takes me 5 minutes to do that, whereas maybe something smaller, it'll be 4 minutes. So it's that throughput more so, not so much the cost, but although cost is
Sometimes, I mean, we will present some alternative cooking equipment that they are not used to, right? That like the auto shams and stuff like that. That they could do similar product in a quicker method, because obviously we don't have the luxury of the gas being there for a few hours. We have them for 45 minutes at max if we can, if we're lucky.
Yep. Brooke, you were
Yeah,
going to come in with
goes
something.
back, it just goes back to integrity of the brand, right? If it's executing at a certain level or a certain taste profile on the street and we can't replicate that in the airport, it's probably not good for the brand or the concessionaire, right? Because the customer is going to be confused. Why is this different on the street versus the airport? But I would say, when looking at it, it's more about, I think one of the key things to do is just the size of menu, right? Let's pick the top hits and reduce the menu and execute those at a high level, as opposed to trying to execute the entire menu. And that also comes down to size and space, right? We have limited storage. So sometimes we just don't have the space to execute a full menu.
And I think something you said about the RFP, some brands have to realize if it's asked for,
Yeah.
gluten-free, children's menu, you may not have that in your location today, but if they're asking for a salad, we have to work together to get that salad onto the menu, unless this is just something you're not willing to do at all, and this is probably not the right opportunity.
Also the grab and go program, right? I mean, we have to have grab and go. So do they have any items on their menu that translate to grab and go?
Right.
Oh yeah, grab and go is king.
So how fun is that then to work with a brand who doesn't have any of those elements, to then work with them to say, well, we need to add a grab and go, we need to add a breakfast, etc. I mean, I think that would be kind of fun, because then you get to kind of see, or at least make suggestions on how it could work best. I mean, ultimately we're trying to win the contract. I get it, but I think that would be kind of interesting, intriguing in some way.
I mean, concept development is one of the funnest pieces of all of our jobs, right? To be able to be creative in this process. But again, it just goes back to the brand's flexibility. If they're willing to work with us and work together, then it's great. But if not, it's like, all right, it's probably a pass,
I agree.
I'm sure there are brands out there that are not as flexible, and they probably know they don't need to be. I'm not going to mention any names.
There's a lot of those.
There's a lot of those, right?
Silvia said, some brands are like, we'll do whatever we want, but that's always not the right answer. And then others like, well, we're just not going to do that at all. And it's like, well, that's not going to work either. So
exactly. There's the middle ground, Brooke, that you're scared of either one. The one who's like, this is my menu. And you're like, ooh, or I don't care what you do. You're like, well, either one of those answers makes me warm and fuzzy about doing this with you.
Find something in the middle.
Exactly.
So just from an operator or a brand developer standpoint, for each of you, what is one way that you can suggest that a brand stand out? I know we talked about menu and then things like that. Is there anything that's off the actual consumable, the tangible things that would make a brand a lot more attractive? And let's try to get away from just saying, hey, well, if the RFP asks for it, because we're thinking from one airport, but if I'm looking at it from a standpoint of, I am a concept, and I might not care if I'm in this airport, but I wouldn't mind being in other airports. So what is one way to kind of make me, if I was a brand, stand out a little more that isn't necessarily like menu tied?
And I will say one of the things I've noticed, and it's becoming more prevalent in our industry, is community.
Yeah.
Are you active in your community? We're seeing a lot of brands and a lot of RFPs asking not just for great customer service and great food, but community involvement. Farm to table, lots of things like that, giving back to charities. So I think that's also becoming, at least I've seen it in a few RFPs, where they actually ask, what is your community involvement or presence? Whether it's, I know you guys have a great brand in LAX, right? Homeboy. That is really becoming really important to airports. They kind of want to see not just great food, but great social commitment.
Yep. And the story, right? What's the story? What's the story of the brand? How did it come about? And community, you hit it.
Mhm.
Milan, any portion of that?
I got two great panelists next to me. I have to say minimum. I agree with Brooke and Silvia.
Trying to
So,
make it easy. It's Friday, Milan, for you, you know?
Yeah, I hear you.
so
Thank you.
that's great. We're letting the women do all the work. I like that. Okay, so moving on, would love to. I'm kind of hopping all over the place, and this is good because I want to keep you guys on your toes in some way. In some of your conversations, I think we hit this at the top of the program. We talk about giving the bad and the ugly of this space. What are some of the reactions that you've gotten when you have had to be a little more, blunt, I should say, with the challenges and difficulties of this airport? We'll start with you, Milan.
Well, some brands, as you know, they don't open for all days of the hours, right? 4 a.m. to midnight. And so I think that making sure that they understand that, hey, it's 365 days, doesn't matter if it snows or rain or tornado or not, you have to be at airport ready to serve the passengers. So I think that's an eye opener. And they're like, oh, I don't get Christmas off. Oh, I don't get holidays off. No, every day is Monday in airport world.
Mhm.
Yeah, and what I'll say from like a brand perspective, Ramon, bad ugly, it's just the truth, right? It's
Mhm.
expensive to operate, it's expensive to build out, with labor and cost of goods as we go back to that. And what Sylvia said earlier, so I think some brands are like, oh, I'm not going to get a 10-15% royalty. It's like, whoa, no, like at the end of the day, it's expensive to operate and we do need to make money, and so depending on employments and the spaces when you're at, just because you're in the airport doesn't mean it's gonna be gangbusters.
And I think one thing I've noticed, and it happens all the time, in the real world, you may be able to add whatever you want to your menu. Like if
Yeah.
right now, donuts are super hot, you could have them. Use clause becomes sort of like a territorial ground, and it's hard to make sure people realize, but oh, I should be selling these, but there's someone else who has that right. So everybody wants the hot item, the pretty girl in the room,
Yeah.
but y'all can't be selling the same thing because then no one makes money. So sometimes brands don't understand that, oh, I went to this fancy food show and I'm going to add X, Y, and Z. And then they're like, you can't add X, Y, and Z.
And when I
Well,
think of donuts, Sylvia, it's a day shelf life. So you have to look at that too. Like, oh, okay, are you going to now deliver donuts on a daily basis to make sure that we have it through the day? So many different factors go into those things.
Exactly. And it's just about like, it's, a lot of, because in your street location, if you're a smaller operator, you can add whatever you like to 90% of your menus. And you can't just be adding Asian to your menu if you were the pizza, right? It just
Right.
it's not going to be allowed. So I think there's that understanding of what you're allowed to do and the constraints of your lease.
So let me go back to something, Sylvia, you mentioned that the use clause. For those of you who might not be aware, just if you can kind of just explain a little bit of what that is, why it's important. I think maybe even talk about adjacencies and how, programs are built, et cetera.
So in a major food court, I know there's a lot of them right now coming out of Orlando as they're redoing and redefining their program. They're going to design where the hamburger is. There's going to be a burger, a pizza, a sandwich, and it's because you want to have an offering for the consumer, but also make sure that all the brands that are being placed there and their genre will be successful. It's very unlikely that you'll be able to support 2 national hamburgers in one food court. So it's about the integrity of the program, but it's also about the sustainability of the program. For an operator or even a direct subtenant, we want to make sure that everyone stays healthy, everyone is in their genre, and not to limit people, but if we all start selling turkey sandwiches, there's not enough demand for turkey sandwiches. So we're all going to start losing money at one point or another, right? So it's one of those, you need the options, but you also need to protect the opportunity for everyone to make money. Like, Brooke says, it's not, everybody wants to be the hamburger bar in every airport because it's the #1 genre, right? We'll all fight to the death for the hamburger bar. No one really wants the vegetarian vegan. So, but someone's got to do it.
Or pre-security.
Oh, you can have all those, Brooke. I'll make you a deal. You can have all those.
Milan, anything to that point?
No, I mean, and then also in the food courts, I mean, you don't want to stick a local brand with all the national powerhouses, right? Because you're
Yeah.
doing
Yeah, that's a good point, Milan. I know we don't like the term, but it's true. The category killers.
Yep.
The
Yeah.
Starbucks, the McDonald's, like these heavy brands that the Chick-fil-A's where they just drive so much demand, and you have a smaller brand next to them that is just dying in their queue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we do see those, and I guess that helps with regards to this is kind of like building off of the answers here, how these programs are constructed, and what do you feel maybe the role as, I mean, Sylvia, you've repped brands, you know, as a consultant, how to basically, I don't want to say influence, but really educate on, you know, why a program should be a lot more diverse in its offerings as opposed to let's just go on. And that's one of the questions actually we talked about, you know, or at least someone has submitted is, you know, local versus popular. Is that ratio? I know it's always going to be more national than local, but it was almost, I would say 70-30 before, and I think it's going to be probably 85-15 more now. But I mean, how can from a brand kind of like show their relevance and not just go with those category killers, I guess.
And I think the one thing I always look at is the demographic. Back to that, right? How much of this is O&D versus transferring? You know, national brands tend to perform much better than locals when it's a transferring airport, right? You've never been to Atlanta or Chicago or any of these cities, and you're probably going to tend to look for something for you and your family, or you and whomever, or just you, that you recognize. Some people are much more adventurous and will try brands they've never heard of, versus if it's a destination like Nashville or in Austin, where you've done a lot of research. A lot of people going there, they're going for the foodie scene. When they see these brands, they're excited to see them at the airport because they read about them and maybe didn't get a chance to go try them in downtown Nashville. So I think it's also understanding who is this traveler and what are they looking for.
Yeah. And Ramon, what I'll say to that, because I remember you sending that question over. Again, it goes back to, you know, educating the brands who haven't worked in the airport world, right, of the RFP process. The RFP usually is very prescriptive of what they're looking for, whether it states, it could just state national burger, you know, so we probably know what they're looking for, and that's just going to DQ. And so sometimes I feel like a large portion of my job, and I know Silvia, you as well, is we're educating brands on the process and how it works. It's not that we can just throw any brand at any time. You know, we got to make sure that we don't get DQ'd out of these RFPs. So it just will state, you know, local, regional, national, and we have to follow that. And then exactly what Silvia said, it's a demographic, right? If you're in an international terminal, a national brand's probably going to do a little bit better than, you know, a very hyper local brand.
So Milan is
And
not,
yeah.
go ahead.
Oh,
Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say to piggyback on Brooke, because I was just thinking of many conversations where you get a brand that you may have signed, like you said, Brooke, 2 years ago, and you really truly believed it was going to be barbecue, right?
Yeah.
And,
Oh my gosh.
right,
Yes.
right. And you're like, I got this barbecue, and then all of a sudden they only want Italian, and they're like, well, why can't you put me there?
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
you feel horrible, you feel bad because you're like, I really believed in my heart of heart. Milan's laughing too. It's gonna be this.
Yeah.
It's everything but that. You're like,
And Sylvia actually brings up a great point again, Ramon, to educate brands that haven't gone through this process. You know, as concessionaires, we have to be ready in every single category, right? So we need to have at least one brand, if not more, in every single category. Because when that RFP is released, we usually only have 90 days to submit. In those 90 days, we don't have time to go scouting brands because we didn't have an Italian, right? Like, I better have some Italian or my boss is coming after me, you know? And so, you know, we do see extensions sometimes in those RFPs, but it's not guaranteed. So, again, you know, it is tough to go back to these brands and say, hey, unfortunately, we weren't able to put you in this bid because of these reasons, right? And sometimes it's just because it wasn't called for, but we had to
I have
prepare.
a question for you, Brooke, because now,
Oh boy.
oh boy, and from Milan as well. Sorry to take, you know,
Okay.
how do you handle it when there's multiple packages and you are successful in one, but not the one that they were in?
That's funny. When we were talking about a piece of advice, right? I was preparing for that question later, but you know, and I'm actually just going to answer it now, Sylvia, because it's perfect, right? You know, you can't give up, right? So, you know, there are multiple packages that come out. And as we know, you can't win all of those packages, right? So we assess the different, performers, what makes more sense, what's going to make money, what's not going to make money based on the brands that we have and those business metrics, right? So financial metrics. And so, yes, you may win one package, but not another. And you may have some really great brands in that package that didn't win. Hopefully we're starting to see airports with multiple packages, right? Multiple RFPs. So hopefully you can use that brand later. But, it is, Sylvia, a lot of times, if you don't win with a brand, they're like, well, you were the wrong concessionaire or something. It's just not the case. There's so many different factors. So,
And the one is like, oh, but why can't you give me so-and-so space?
oh yeah.
And right, and I know
We're not trying to
it's
give
an
ideas
emotional plea,
Yeah,
and you're
no,
like,
totally.
I can't take Brooke's space and give it to you, or
Yeah.
Milan space and give it
But
to you.
sometimes it's good to stay close to the brands that didn't make it, right? Because you never know what happens when we get to the reality,
course.
right? You may have to have a space to switch out, or the brand, or somebody gets cold feet, or whatever. That may be an opportunity for them.
That's a great point. That happens, right? A brand
Yeah.
says, you know what, this isn't the right time, or we're having issues, we can't do it. Or the airport comes and says, hey, we really liked this brand, or one of your alternatives, and wants to switch it out. So you're exactly right.
Something that I've written a whole bunch of things down that I think Brooke mentioned in the beginning also is for those who might not be aware, if we know that just the length of time. So we know that there's some spaces are coming up at this point. That means RFP could be issued by this point, which means I got to be on the ground, boots on the ground at this point. So if we get that's working back or pre-expiration now, you get to let's go in the other direction in terms of we got build, opening, and got if again assuming that there are no delays, but we got to build, then we got to do soft openings and we opened and all that stuff. That could be a couple years. It could be a while, and on top of that, yeah, it goes back to I think Brooke mentioned like the staying power, longevity. I've never really seen it happen, but I know it's like the best burger at that moment might be X, and then all of a sudden, the CEO went crazy, or it's just there might have been like a listeria outbreak. I don't know. And now it's
Scandal.
yeah, exactly. So like, so Milan, from your end, like when you're picking or you're gonna build your coalition of the willing for this thing, you have to really look forward and at least let them know stay out of trouble, but also just kind of stay relevant in many ways.
Well, it happens all the time, right? I mean, we had a brand partner that got cold feet after we won, and we had to go back to the airport and change out the concept. It's like, why'd you get cold feet? You made me spend all this money on the RFP. We won. Now all of a sudden you got cold feet, right? Because they didn't have the resources to support us or whatever the case might be. But having conversations, they felt great. They're like, yeah, we're in, let's go, So, that you're gonna have to overcome challenges like that. Some airports are flexible that they will let you come over that. Otherwise you forfeit that space,
I don't know if
And
Sylvia,
think of delays, right? Like COVID. I know there were probably brands signed in 2019 in preparation for 2020, right? RFPs. Well, some of those RFPs that were supposed to come out of 2020, it came out last year or even this year. So some brands have been signed for 5 or 6 years, and they're like, what is going on, right? I see, brands all the time and reach out and I'm like, it's a sit and wait game. Like it's coming. And Intel changes, or like in LAX, the Olympics happened, right? They wanted to do all this work and then they just ran out of time. So those things happen, and they're not easy conversations to have with a brand, but it's like, look, the airport world sometimes can be a sit and wait, but once you get in, we're seeing contracts again, 10, 12, 15 years.
Yeah.
Sylvia, is there anything you wanted to add?
And I think it's also very similar to what Brooke said. Sometimes management changes in the airport, and what you were building, like they wanted super hyper local. You get a new airport director, a new concession staff, and they're like, I don't want any of that.
Yeah.
I want TGI Fridays, or I want national brands. I've been successful with them in my previous life. It's what I prefer. So sometimes you got to pivot, right? Like you're building for someone's desire, and then all of a sudden there's someone new and they're like, that's not my vision.
Well, and airlines too.
Airlines are another one.
Airlines have an opinion. So depending on which terminal you are, they may want a specific brand.
Sometimes the airlines do have a lot of voice, and other terminals, they could care less what you do.
Exactly.
So it all really depends on management when it comes to the airport authorities or operations, because we've all had to kind of You get a call from someone saying, oh, by the way, so-and-so is coming. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh boy, that's a different program altogether.
I want to pivot to a retail question. I just got texted something. Is there a category of retail that, I mean, we think of the typical stuff, like you have a lot of your souvenir, your newsstand, your gift, your or maybe that's where the hyper local comes in. I think for me, my point of view is it's either got to be it's scarcity. If I can't get it anywhere else on the retail side, I'm definitely going to get it there. Or it's something completely out of need. I lost my AirPods or whatever, and I got another long layout. I'm going to buy something. Or I can't, or it's just, I'm just into the tchotchkes. Is there a category, if it's electronics or jewelry, confectionery, or whatever, that you guys just think from a retail perspective has some legs and staying power? Because that's usually, retail is pretty difficult.
Yeah. I'll probably say of how retail, of what I've seen is probably, I mean, you said like the main categories are, you know, souvenir, gift, local, artists and food tends to do very, very well in a lot of foodie markets. Electronics is still incredibly strong. We're seeing like the comeback of, you know, confectionery, whether that is in like, you know, C's Candies or like other candy. It's again, it's bordering on the food. But when it comes to specialty, you really it's back to demographics, right? Who is the end user? Are these connecting business travelers? I'm flying through Dallas to get to somewhere else. I forgot my charger, my battery phone, whatever. Or is it more like I really want a sense of place because I came on a girls' weekend to, you know, Austin and want to bring back, like, you know, like you said so lovingly, tchotchkes to back to the people at home, right? Because who doesn't need that magnet?
Yeah.
You laugh, but I do like the magnets and Christmas ornaments. By the way, airports, if they're going to be watching or on here, the holiday ornaments, especially when I travel, big for me. Anyway, that's just me. But Milan, from an operator, I don't know how much retail you might have. I know you're dummy on the food side, but would you concur in terms of just like, again, the same thing as it like Silvia was kind of hinting at?
Yeah, I mean, you want to provide what the consumer is looking for, right? I mean, convenience retail is going to be the big seller, right? At the end of the day, if you could just have convenience stores in the airport and not do the specialty, I think it's a home run. But the airports are going to be like, no way, you got to give me this in order for me to give you that. So that's where it becomes a little crazy from financial perspective,
Yeah.
Gotcha. I did get another question. We know when most people travel, or when people travel the most, in what period of the day. Should a lot of concepts consider day part when they are ultimately going to decide to get into the space? We talked about adding menus to make sure that they're relevant and hitting that stuff. But like, are you guys purposely making sure that they are flexible enough to hit all day parts? I'm going to start to Brooke on that one.
Yeah, I think breakfast is usually the biggest topic, right? Because, I don't want to say a lot of brands, but a good chunk of brands sometimes don't have breakfast. So just always having that when you're having that initial conversation with the brand saying, hey, I noticed you don't have breakfast. It may be called for, and having that conversation up front. Because again, once that RFP is released, we should already have that information because it's such a tight timeline. We can't be fighting over a breakfast menu. We need to really have those discussions prior. But I would say breakfast is always the day part that comes up, right? And then again, it goes also by, airport hours. Sometimes it'll say, you need to be open at 6 a.m. for breakfast and kind of dictate your hours.
Milan?
No, I agree. I mean, also day parts are important, right? I mean, as Brooke mentioned, breakfast is heavy. So you don't want a snack category that is more leaning towards the PM segment. Then in the morning, you're going to be losing those sales,
Gotcha. So is like snack or things that are almost agnostic in terms of what category they're not, you look at, it fails me now, but there are desserts or things like that, like, cookies and things like that aren't, they fit within.
Yeah.
In between.
It's like a good addition, right? Like, I mean, who doesn't love like a pretzel cookie combination? It's kind of hitting both. And who also, when you're walking through the terminal, you smell the cookie or the pretzel and you're not like, oh man, I want one of those. Like, some pretty good marketing. So, if you can blend concepts to improve that overall square footage, right? Instead of just dedicating 600 square feet to pretzel, like Milan said. Well, what about breakfast? How, what's their breakfast going to look like on that? So, when you can do those combined units, I think that's where we can be really successful, and also give the guests a variety of options.
Mm-hmm.
Ice cream. Everyone's ice cream. Yeah. Who doesn't? Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
alcohol at AM. All right, Maria.
I know. I'm
No,
like,
no,
man,
Maria,
I
no,
just keep
Maria
going
knows
with
it.
this.
Friday here in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Already.
Ice cream with alcohol, definitely.
Yeah, exactly.
I've seen some of those concepts.
The Avi Ramsey brand, or what? I don't sure if I
Yep.
said that right, but they were at AXC last year.
Yeah, and I've seen some here at the mall by my house, like a few, like they kind of
That's them.
been testing them.
They're in they're in Aventura, and everyone that's not from South
Yes.
Florida, you guys,
Yeah.
we know Aventura, but no, it's one of those, like, how do we, it's great to find almost a niche, because you're not in those segments. You can kind of play in any one without being identified as strictly one day part or
Right.
another. Another question I just got, and this is more so, this might be getting into the weeds, sourcing ingredients, or like Brooke, you mentioned earlier, if you're going to be a donut concept and those have a shelf life of maybe 24 hours, what are some of the ways to work through that if they don't have much of a shelf life? Or,
I mean, it's a couple things, right? Like, if you can get the majority of the ingredients through one of the broadline distributors, that's great, right? If there is maybe one or two specialty items that has a longer shelf life, well, that's not impossible, right? If it's maybe one delivery a week, right? That's easily managed. But, I mean, we have a lot of donuts out there, a lot of different donut concepts out there, and they're doing daily delivery. So it's just something to consider. And again, having those conversations early so the brand understands what those factors are, as opposed to you get so far down the road and you're like, oh man, this isn't going to work for either. It's a bummer for both.
Right.
And I
And
think,
also,
sorry, Nolan.
Go ahead, Silvia, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the things that just popped in my head, it's also how we deliver to the airports.
Right.
They're not all the same, right?
No.
Sometimes you can get 3 deliveries daily a day, and others, when we have a third-party distribution center, right, you're kind of handcuffed on what you can or cannot do with these brands because of their delivery.
And size, and that could also, Silvia, as you said, differ between concessionaire. Depending on the amount of business the concessionaires have at those airports,
Sure.
one concessionaire may have a massive warehouse because they just have a large portfolio of the business, and one doesn't, right? And those deliveries are different. So there's just a lot of factors when it comes to each airport and concessionaire too. And then pre-security, post-security, et cetera.
It's also educating the main, like Brooke mentioned, mainline distributors are easier, right? They know how to get to the airport, but if it's a brand specific vendor that they're providing to their store, now educating them to go to Bradford Logistics or whoever the third party, et cetera. It's added nuances that the brand their partner has to be willing to look at it as well.
Yeah. And getting badged, having your delivery driver get badged. Like, you don't get that badge through the concessionaire company.
No.
They have to go to the badging office and do that themselves. They need to be willing to go through that work, because it's not, and that could take 30, 60, 90 days, depending on the airport and length of time, et cetera.
So it's, I think where I wanted to take this is, like, I remember several concepts. This is back in the, the Celebrity Chef or whatever chef's days. And they're like, no, I don't want to go through a Cisco or a US Foods or whatever. And they're like, sorry, dude, you kind of have to. I mean, are we still seeing some of that where, I mean, you can make accommodations if you can't get that anywhere. But I mean, for the most part, I think like you guys said, you go through a main distributor who has the capabilities to deliver. If, and I'm talking more so if it's a concept that just says, I really want to go to this from this farm, and that's it. Which isn't feasible typically. You guys seeing that still?
It's not possible, right? You just have to have those conversations to figure out what does that look like, and then, go from there. I have to comment on Steve. Yes, Steve, this is the best panel of the year. So
I saw that too.
standards have been set high. That's correct.
You guys have anything to add to that, Silvia and Milan, or?
No, I mean,
Yeah, it's a hard conversation because sometimes people are very passionate about it. But I'm sure, Milan, I know in Kansas City you have a very, hyper local program. So I'm sure you saw a lot of challenges with some of those brands.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we had to make sure that, I mean, we do cuttings, right? If the vendor, if the brand says, hey, we're procuring it from here, we'll do a side-by-side cutting and let them taste it. And they're like, oh, this one's better. And sometimes, the main broadline distributors' food is equally or better as long as its quality is met,
So I have two more questions, and I want these to be kind of fun, or at least have you guys treat it to be fun.
You're not having fun.
No. We are having fun. I know I don't really care about anyone else. I know we're having fun. But I mean, like, I wanted to kind of like well, let me just ask it. So I'm gonna start with Brooke on this. I like putting her on the spot. What was one, I'm not gonna say a concept, but maybe a category that in your time, at the time, you thought this is gonna be it. You gotta go with the X, and it just, not that because you guys didn't win the contract, but like it just, for whatever reason, didn't have the staying power. Like I would have thought, I mean, I'll make it up. Like I thought, like, churros are going to be the big thing. So I would lean into it, and all of a sudden churros are not. I'm just saying something like that.
I mean, Ramona, it's kind of the opposite for me. I got caught in a spot where I didn't have, well, actually, I had a brand for a concept, and like Milan said, they backed out in the RFP process, and I didn't have a backup. And I was like, oh boy, I hope Rich isn't hearing this. But, anyways, then for me, it was crap. I need to go find a brand for this, because the brand that I thought that I had planned, this local, oh my gosh, this is crush, this is gonna win, like that's what I had, right? I had this local brand, and they said, they had a whole change in leadership, Silvia. That's what happened. Their company had a whole change in leadership, and they were like, we are not ready for this airport world. They didn't even know that they had a signed LOI. It was pretty insane, right? And then I was rushing like, oh crap, I've got to fit this, because we're submitting in 60 days. So that's more my crazy story.
Silvia?
Oh, and I'm going to refer back to my parodies days. And I'm sure Greg will probably love to hear this. He was very good friends with the owner of Spanx, him and his wife, Greg Parodies. And I literally thought that was going to be the biggest dog in the catalog, right? And lo and behold, it does incredibly well. Because I was like, who's going to buy that stuff at the airport? Well, a lot of people do, men and women. And again, I was like, this is gonna suck. So sometimes sometimes you have to take yourself out of these deals, because we become emotional. Like, I love this genre and I think it's gonna do great, and then it flops completely, and vice versa. So sometimes you gotta try to keep an open mind. But sometimes it's the opposite. You really think it's gonna be a dog, and you're like, wow, it's outperforming anything we thought it could do.
Yeah.
And I know Ramon buys a lot of it, so okay, I'll make sure we keep it in Palm Beach for you.
Wearing it now. I mean, I've been wearing it since 2018. Thanks for the discount, Greg. Just kidding. So Milan, I'll go to you on that one. It was maybe a concept you thought this is gonna do well, and it just didn't. You don't have to go into specifics, although you can if you want.
So we try to, like, for example, we were talking about snack category, right? It's always good to kind of combine another category with it to kind of cover the day parts and still give the airport the brands that they want. But in that, I mean, sometimes you miss the mark, and it's like, oh my gosh, why did I do this? And it's like your investment is gone bad now, and then you're having to rebrand it and etc. And majority of the time is like, some of the brands that you go in the markets and you're like, hey, I'm going to go with this brand. It's a home run. The airport's going to love it. And you're like, what happened? Why didn't they choose me? It's like so total opposite.
Yeah, Lord. All right. So you guys already know what my last question is going to be. And so what is one piece of advice that you would like to give to any aspiring concept of brand that would want to get into this space? And ladies first, we'll start with Silvia.
I would probably say build your own network. I think a lot of brands rely heavily on just operators. And I've seen both ways work, but I've also seen a lot of success when brands take the initiative. If you're a local brand and your desire is to be in the Fort Lauderdale airport, is making an appointment with their concessions people. If you have the potential to become a minority business, meet out, with the ACDBE coordinators. Because sometimes that's also as important than relying on, like you said, how do you add value as a local brand or a national brand? It's also having your own network. It's impressive when a brand can tell you, well, I just met with so-and-so at the airport. They'd come to see me at lunch. And they're fostering that relationship too. So that adds not only the value of their brand, but the value of their relationship.
Good one. Brooke?
Just don't give up, right? Whether you were in someone's package and you lost, or you didn't get in someone's package because potentially your category didn't come up, right? Don't give up. continue to get your brand out there to the airport so they are aware of it, and then continue to push these, concessionaires to see how you can get in. And just because they lost a package, it doesn't mean it's the wrong concessionaire or the wrong brand. There's so many different factors that go into the awarding of these RFPs.
Milan, take us home.
I would agree with both Silvia and Brooke. On top of that, I would say be true to yourself, right? Be who you are. Don't try to change anything because you didn't lose or you didn't win, right? It's like Brooke said, don't give up, keep have hope, and also, just be open-minded at the end of the day.
Okay.
Yeah, we need that. That's true. Well, we are at the bottom of the hour, and I want to thank everyone here, especially the panel, Silvia, Brooke, and Milan. Thank you so very much for your time. Also to everyone in the audience, and if you're probably going to be watching this on the recording, thank you for watching. It will be posted on YouTube in the coming days. But hopefully you enjoyed this version of 360. We will be doing more where it's not just me talking and interviewing. It's really going to be a lot of including and engaging our members to kind of submit questions and engage our subject matter experts. So with that, I will go back to the top of the hour with some housekeeping announcements. The econ form registration is open. Please go to amacforum.com to register. We will be opening the annual website for the Airport Business Diversity Conference, which is going to be in June 28th, July 2nd in New Orleans. That website will open soon. And lastly, but not leastly, because it is in my title, Director of Membership and Industry Engagement, please make sure you renew your membership. And if you have questions, let me know. And with that, I want to wish everyone a great long weekend, and thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank
you,
you,
guys.
Thank you, Milan. See you later.
See you.